The departure and the void. The warm hues of an autumn sunset bathed the streets of New York City as Eduardo Martinez stood before his floor-to-ceiling office window. The skyline stretched endlessly, its sharp edges softened by the golden glow of the setting sun. It was a view of success, a testament to the years of sacrifice and hard work that had brought him to this moment. Eduardo had built an empire, a pharmaceutical company that bore his name and dominated the industry. But as he gazed out, a hollow ache filled his chest. His reflection in the glass was as polished and sharp as the suits he wore, yet it revealed nothing of the man inside. 5 years ago, Eduardo had left behind more than just a modest life. He had left behind Clara. She had been his anchor, his confidant, and his greatest love. But ambition had demanded sacrifices. When the opportunity to expand his business internationally arose, he had chosen success over love, wealth over warmth, and independence over intimacy. Clara had begged him to stay, but Eduardo, consumed by his dreams, had walked away. Now the silence of his luxurious penthouse was deafening. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. He swirled it absently, his thoughts drifting to Clara's face as he'd last seen it, tear-streaked, yet defiant. He had told himself she'd move on, that she'd be better off without him, but the memory of her sorrow had haunted him in quiet moments like this. Meanwhile, across the city in Brooklyn, Clara Harrison was bustling around her kitchen, preparing dinner for her 2 daughters. Emily, a vivacious 5-year-old with an infectious laugh, was perched on a stool, chattering about her day at school. Sophia, her quieter twin, sat at the dining table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she colored in a sketchbook. The modest brownstone Clara had worked tirelessly to afford was filled with warmth and love, a stark contrast to the sterile, empty world Eduardo now inhabited. Clara had transformed her life in Eduardo's absence. The woman who had once been consumed by heartbreak was now a confident and accomplished pharmaceutical executive. She had climbed the corporate ladder, driven by a determination to provide for her daughters, and prove that she could thrive without Eduardo. But despite her success, a part of her heart remained scared, a wound that had never fully healed. Her mother, Rose, entered the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She gave Clara a knowing look as she set the table. "You've been quiet today," Rose remarked. "Is something on your mind?" Clara hesitated, her thoughts lingering on the email she had received earlier from Martinez Pharmaceuticals. It was an invitation to present her company's latest product at a high-stakes meeting, a potential partnership that could solidify her place at the top of the industry. But the name on the email signature had sent a chill down her spine. Eduardo Martinez. "It's nothing," Clara replied, forcing a smile. "Just a big presentation tomorrow." Rose raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. She had learned over the years that Clara would open up in her own time. Instead, she turned her attention to the twins, who were now engaged in a playful argument about who had the best drawing. As Clara tucked her daughters into bed that night, she lingered in their shared room, watching their peaceful faces. Emily clutched a stuffed bunny. Her lips curled into a soft smile, even in sleep. Sophia lay curled up on her side, her small hand resting on her sister's. They were her world, her reason for everything, and she would do anything to protect them. The following morning, Clara arrived at the sleek headquarters of Martinez Pharmaceuticals, her heart pounding in her chest. She had rehearsed her presentation countless times, but the thought of facing Eduardo after all these years made her hands tremble. She steeled herself, reminding herself of all she had overcome. This wasn't about the past. It was about the future she was building for Emily and Sophia. The conference room was a study in modern minimalism, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city. Clara entered with her head held high, her tailored suit a shield against the memories threatening to overwhelm her. Her gaze swept over the executives seated around the table until it landed on Eduardo. He was as striking as ever, his dark hair neatly combed, his sharp suit tailored to perfection. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, a shadow of regret. that caught Clara off guard. She quickly averted her gaze, focusing on the task at hand. As she launched into her presentation, Eduardo's attention was unwavering. He was impressed by her poise and expertise, but there was an undercurrent of familiarity in her voice and gestures that he couldn't quite place. When their eyes met again, something unspoken passed between them, a reminder of the bond they had once shared. After the presentation, Eduardo approached Clara, his tone professional yet warm. "Exceptional work," he remarked, extending his hand. Clara hesitated before shaking it, her smile tight. "Thank you." Before he could say more, her phone buzzed with a text from Rose. "Picked up the girls. All is well. Love you." Relief washed over Clara, but it was tinged with tension. She couldn't let Eduardo disrupt the life she had built. Not now. Not ever. As Eduardo watched her leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Clara's story than she was letting on. And as Clara stepped into the elevator, her heart racing, she knew that the meeting with Eduardo was just the beginning. A storm was brewing, one that would force her to confront the secrets she had kept buried for so long. The ties that bind. The steady rhythm of Manhattan's rain pattered against the towering glass windows of Martinez Pharmaceuticals. Eduardo sat in his expansive corner office, the muted light casting long shadows across the room. He had spent the last hour lost in thought, his mind circling back to Clara's presentation. It wasn't just her professional brilliance that lingered. It was the familiarity, the unshakable feeling that she was more than just an old acquaintance. On his desk, a stack of untouched reports sat ignored. Instead, Eduardo's attention was on his phone. He tapped his fingers absently against its sleek surface before opening the email he had sent Clara the day before. Her response had been brief, polite, and frustratingly distant. The Clara he remembered had been vibrant and expressive, but this version of her was a fortress, carefully guarding every emotion. What had changed her so drastically? Meanwhile, across the East River in Brooklyn, Clara was rushing through her evening routine. The warm aroma of tomato soup filled the kitchen as Rose stirred the pot, humming softly to herself. Emily was perched on the counter, chattering about her art project, while Sophia quietly practiced her violin in the adjacent living room. Clara's mind, however, was elsewhere. The encounter with Eduardo had stirred up memories she had long buried, memories of a love that had once burned brightly but had been extinguished by betrayal and ambition. She looked over at her daughters, their laughter and gentle banter a balm to her frayed nerves. "Mama," Emily said suddenly, snapping Clara out of her reverie. "Can we go to the park tomorrow? Sophia said she wants to draw the trees." Clara smiled, kneeling to Emily's level. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. But first, you need to finish your dinner." Sophia's quiet voice floated in from the living room. "Can we bring hot chocolate? It's cold outside." Clara's heart swelled at the simple request. Her daughters, with their contrasting personalities, were her world. Emily's exuberance balanced Sophia's thoughtful nature, and together, they filled the house with warmth. But as she looked at them, a knot of worry twisted in her chest. How much longer could she shield them from the truth about their father? That evening, after the twins were tucked into bed, Clara sat with Rose in the cozy kitchen. The rain had stopped, and the city was quiet, save for the occasional whoosh of a passing car. Clara sipped her tea, her thoughts far away. "You've been on edge since the meeting," Rose said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Is it Eduardo?" Clara sighed, setting her mug down. "He doesn't know. About Emily and Sophia. And I can't decide if I should keep it that way." Rose leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "He deserves to know, Clara. And so do the girls. They're asking more questions. Especially Sophia. She's sharp. She'll piece it together soon enough." Clara shook her head. "I can't risk it, Mom. What if he tries to take them? Or what if he decides he doesn't want anything to do with them? They've been through enough." Rose reached across the table, placing a hand over Clara's. "You've raised those girls with so much love. Whatever happens, they'll always have you. but keeping the truth from them could hurt them more in the long run. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. She hated the vulnerability that came with discussing Eduardo, but Rose was right. The time for secrets was running out. The following day, Eduardo found himself in an unlikely place. His mother Maria's cozy apartment in Brooklyn. The warm, savory scent of her cooking filled the air as she bustled around the kitchen, her weathered hands expertly chopping vegetables. Eduardo sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of coffee untouched before him. "You look troubled, mio," Maria said, her sharp eyes catching his distracted demeanor. "What's on your mind?" Eduardo hesitated, unsure where to begin. Finally, he said, "I met someone from my past. She was at a business meeting." Maria paused, her knife hovering over the cutting board. "Someone important?" "I don't know," Eduardo admitted. "She feels familiar, but I can't place why. There's something about her that I can't shake, like I've missed something important." Maria turned to face him, her expression both concerned and curious. "Life has a way of showing us what we need to see, Eduardo. Maybe this woman is part of a chapter you've left unfinished." Her words struck a chord. Eduardo had always prided himself on controlling every aspect of his life, but the unease Clara had stirred in him felt like a loose thread he couldn't ignore. At the same time, Clara was at the park with Emily and Sofia. The girls raced ahead, their laughter echoing through the crisp autumn air. Sofia carried a sketchpad, her small hands carefully outlining the branches of a bare tree, while Emily darted around, collecting colorful leaves to press into her scrapbook. Clara watched them from a distance, her heart full but heavy. They were growing so quickly, and with each passing day, their questions about their father became harder to deflect. She thought of Eduardo's email, his formal tone underscored by a curiosity she couldn't ignore. Would telling him about the twins be the right thing to do? Or would it shatter the fragile peace she had built? "Mama," Emily called, running back to her. "Sofia says her drawing isn't good, but I think it's amazing." Clara knelt beside Sofia, who held up her sketch with a shy smile. It was a beautiful rendering of the tree, its delicate lines capturing its stark beauty. Clara hugged her daughter tightly. "It's perfect, sweetheart, just like you." Sophia's face lit up, but her next words were more serious. "Mama, do you think we'll ever have a dad like other kids?" Clara's breath caught, but she forced herself to stay composed. "Every family is different, my love. And ours is full of love, just the way it is." Sophia nodded thoughtfully, but Clara could see the unspoken questions lingering in her daughter's eyes. She knew she couldn't put off the inevitable forever. Later that evening, as Eduardo sat alone in his penthouse, he picked up his phone and typed a new email to Clara. This time, his words were more personal, his curiosity barely concealed. He hit send and leaned back in his chair, staring out at the glittering city lights. The emptiness that had once seemed bearable now felt suffocating. Clara received the email as she was preparing the twins for bed. Her initial reaction was to ignore it, but something stopped her. Eduardo's persistence, though frustrating, also carried a weight she couldn't dismiss. She sat at her desk, staring at the screen, before finally responding with a single sentence. "Let's meet tomorrow at Madison Park, 3 p.m. As she hit send, a wave of apprehension washed over her. The meeting with Eduardo was inevitable, but it would open doors she had spent years trying to keep closed. Still, she reminded herself, this wasn't about her. It was about Emily and Sofia, and the truth they deserved to know. The meeting that changed everything. The warm afternoon sun filtered through the leafy canopies of Madison Square Park, casting dappled shadows over the benches and cobblestone paths. Clara sat at a small wooden table near the park's central fountain, her fingers fidgeting with the handle of her coffee cup. She had chosen this spot deliberately, open, public, and neutral. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the anticipation of what was to come. Eduardo arrived precisely on time, his tall figure cutting a striking silhouette against the bustling park. Dressed casually in a dark sweater and jeans, he seemed different, less guarded, more approachable. Clara noted the slight hesitation in his step as he spotted her, as if he too felt the weight of this encounter. "Clara," he greeted, his voice warm yet tinged with uncertainty. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, his eyes searching hers. "Eduardo," she replied with a small nod, keeping her tone neutral. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. For a moment, neither spoke, each measuring the other, trying to navigate the labyrinth of their shared history. "I appreciate you meeting me," Eduardo began, breaking the silence. "I know I've disrupted your life, and that was never my intention." Clara took a deep breath, her hand stilling as she placed her coffee cup down. "You haven't just disrupted my life, Eduardo. You've stirred up memories I've spent years trying to bury." Eduardo leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I didn't come here to cause you pain, but I can't shake the feeling that there's something you're not telling me." Clara's gaze dropped to the table, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the worn wood. She had spent countless nights rehearsing this moment, preparing for the inevitable questions, the confessions, and the fallout. Yet now, sitting across from Eduardo, the words felt impossibly heavy. "You're right," she said finally, her voice steady but quiet. "There's something I haven't told you, something I didn't think you deserved to know after the way you left." Eduardo's brow furrowed, his breath hitching. "What is it?" Clara looked up, meeting his eyes. "5 years ago, after you walked away, I found out I was pregnant." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Eduardo's expression froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Pregnant?" he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Clara continued, her tone unwavering despite the storm of emotions swirling within her. "With twins, Emily and Sofia. They're 5 now. They're bright, beautiful, and full of life. And they have no idea who you are." Eduardo sat back in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if to anchor himself. His mind raced, a whirlwind of guilt, shock, and a sudden fierce longing. "Twins," he murmured, the word tasting foreign and bittersweet on his tongue. I didn't know, Clara. You have to believe me. If I had known." Clara cut him off, her voice sharp. "If you had known? What? Would you have stayed? Would you have put your career on hold for us?" "Because from where I'm sitting, the man who walked out 5 years ago wouldn't have." Eduardo flinched at her words, their truth cutting deeper than he cared to admit. He had been so consumed by his ambition, so focused on building his empire, that he hadn't considered what he was leaving behind. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice low. "I was selfish, Clara. I was blind. But I'm not that man anymore. Please, let me meet them. Let me try to make this right." Clara studied him, her sharp eyes searching for any sign of insincerity. For a moment, she saw a glimmer of the man she had once loved, the man who had held her hand during her lowest moments and promised her the world. But she also saw the man who had abandoned her, who had left her to navigate the challenges of motherhood alone. "They're not ready," she said finally. "And honestly, neither am I. This isn't just about you making amends, Eduardo. It's about their lives, their stability. They're happy. They're thriving. And I won't let anything jeopardize that." Eduardo nodded, his shoulders sagging under the weight of her words. "I understand. But I want to be part of their lives, Clara. Even if it takes time. I'll do whatever it takes." Clara exhaled deeply, her resolve softening just enough to let a sliver of hope through. If I let you meet them, it will be on my terms. No surprises, no drama. They come first, always." "Of course," Eduardo agreed, his voice firm. "Whatever you need." That evening, Clara sat with her daughters in the living room, the warmth of the fireplace casting a cozy glow over the room. Emily was sprawled on the floor, flipping through a picture book, while Sofia sat beside Clara, her sketchpad balanced on her lap. "Mama," Sofia said suddenly, her soft voice breaking the comfortable silence. "You seem sad today. Did something happen?" Clara looked at her daughter, startled by her perceptiveness. Sophia's big brown eyes, so much like Eduardo's, stared back at her, filled with quiet curiosity. "I wasn't sad, sweetheart," Clara said, brushing a strand of hair from Sophia's face. "I was just thinking about some old memories." "About Papa?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily's head shot up at the mention of the word, her bright eyes wide with curiosity. "Papa? Do we have a papa?" Clara felt her chest tighten, the moment she had dreaded now staring her in the face. She had known this day would come, but she hadn't expected it to arrive so soon. "Yes," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You do." Both girls stared at her, their expressions a mixture of wonder and confusion. Clara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "His name is Eduardo," she continued. "He didn't know about you until recently. But he wants to meet you." "Really?" Emily asked, her voice bubbling with excitement. "What's he like? Does he look like us?" Sophia was quieter, her thoughtful gaze fixed on Clara. "Why didn't he know about us before?" she asked. Clara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," she said finally. "But he's here now, and he wants to get to know you. Only if you're ready, though. This is your choice." Emily nodded eagerly, already bouncing with anticipation. "I want to meet him. Maybe he'll play games with us." Sophia remained silent, her small hands clutching her sketchpad. Clara gently touched her shoulder. "Sophia, what do you think?" Sophia looked up, her expression cautious but curious. "I think I want to meet him too. But I don't want him to go away again." Clara hugged her tightly, tears stinging her eyes. "I'll make sure he knows how important you both are. I promise." As the girls drifted off to sleep later that night, Clara sat alone in the living room, staring into the flickering flames of the fireplace. She had taken the first step toward bridging the gap between Eduardo and their daughters, but the road ahead was uncertain. Still, she reminded herself, this wasn't about her fears or her past. It was about Emily and Sophia, and giving them the chance to know their father. The next morning, Clara sent Eduardo a message. "They're ready to meet you. Let's arrange something soon." As she hit send, a mix of apprehension and hope coursed through her. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the sake of her daughters, she was willing to find out. The first encounter. The crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of fallen leaves as Clara prepared Emily and Sophia for their first meeting with Eduardo. She had chosen a quiet, family-friendly cafe nestled in a serene corner of Brooklyn, a place where they could talk without distractions. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed Sophia's sweater and fixed a small bow in Emily's hair. This moment felt monumental, like the culmination of years of unspoken truths and buried emotions. "Do you think he'll like us?" Emily asked, her bright eyes wide with excitement. She twirled in place, her little skirt flaring around her. Clara knelt to her daughter's level, brushing a strand of curly hair away from her face. "He's going to love you both," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "You're amazing, just as you are." Sophia, ever the quieter of the two, clutched her small sketchpad. "What if we don't like him?" she asked softly, her eyes searching Clara's face for reassurance. Clara smiled gently, placing a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "You don't have to decide anything today. Just meet him and see how you feel, okay?" Sophia nodded, though her grip on the sketchpad remained tight. Clara kissed both girls on their foreheads and ushered them toward the door. "Ready?" she asked. Emily nodded enthusiastically, while Sophia gave a small, hesitant nod. Eduardo was already seated at a corner table when Clara and the girls arrived. He had spent the last hour rehearsing what he would say, how he would act, and how he could possibly make up for the years he had missed. But the moment he saw them, all his carefully planned words vanished. Emily skipped ahead, her boundless energy carrying her across the cafe in seconds. "Hi, I'm Emily," she declared, her voice ringing out like a bell. She extended a small hand toward Eduardo, her smile so bright it could have lit the entire room. Eduardo knelt down, his heart swelling with emotion as he took her tiny hand in his. "Hi, Emily," he said softly. "I'm Eduardo. It's so nice to finally meet you." Clara watched from a few steps behind, her heart in her throat. Sophia hung back, her small hand clutching Clara's as she studied Eduardo with cautious eyes. Eduardo's gaze shifted to Sophia, and he noticed the guarded look in her eyes. He didn't move closer but instead smiled gently. "You must be Sophia," he said. "I've heard so much about you." Sophia hesitated, her grip on Clara's hand tightening. But after a moment, she took a small step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hi." Eduardo's heart ached at her hesitation. But he didn't push. Instead, he gestured toward the table. "I brought something for you both," he said, his tone warm but tentative. On the table were two small, gift-wrapped boxes. Emily's curiosity got the better of her, and she quickly tore into her box, revealing a colorful puzzle set. "Wow, I love puzzles," she exclaimed, her excitement bubbling over. Sophia opened her box more carefully, revealing a set of high-quality colored pencils and a sketchpad. Her eyes lit up with a mixture of surprise and delight, though she quickly masked her emotions. "Thank you," Sophia said quietly, her fingers brushing over the smooth surface of the sketchpad. "You're welcome," Eduardo replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought you might like them." Clara took a seat, her posture tense as she watched the interaction unfold. For all her apprehension, she couldn't deny the genuine effort Eduardo was making. He wasn't trying to overwhelm the girls or win them over with grand gestures. He was simply meeting them where they were. The conversation that followed was a delicate dance. Emily, ever the chatterbox, dominated the conversation with stories about school, her favorite books, and her recent attempt to bake cookies that had turned into a chocolate disaster. Eduardo laughed along, his deep voice carrying a warmth Clara hadn't heard in years. Sophia, on the other hand, remained mostly silent, her sharp eyes observing Eduardo with a quiet intensity. When Eduardo asked her about her drawings, she responded with short, thoughtful answers, but Clara noticed the way she softened slightly as the conversation continued. "Do you play games?" Emily asked suddenly, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Because I'm really good at Mama says I'm a card shark." Eduardo chuckled, his smile reaching his eyes. "I used to play a lot of games. Maybe you can teach me how to be a card shark." Emily beamed, clearly thrilled by the idea. "It's a deal." As the afternoon wore on, the initial tension began to ease. Eduardo's natural charm and patience seemed to resonate with Emily's exuberance, and Sophia's quieter demeanor. Clara watched the scene unfold, her emotions a whirlwind of relief, apprehension, and something she couldn't quite name. When it was time to leave, Eduardo knelt to their level once more. "I had a wonderful time with you both," he said, his voice earnest. "Thank you for spending the afternoon with me." Emily threw her arms around him in a spontaneous hug. "Come back soon, okay?" she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Eduardo hugged her back, his throat tight. "I will," he promised. Sophia hesitated but then stepped forward, extending her hand for a handshake. Eduardo took it gently, his heart swelling at the small but significant gesture. "Goodbye, Sophia," he said softly. "I hope I get to see more of your drawings next time." Sophia nodded, her expression unreadable. "Goodbye." As Clara walked the girls home, Emily chattered nonstop about how cool Eduardo was and how she couldn't wait to show him her other puzzles. Sophia, however, was quieter than usual, her small hand slipping into Clara's as they crossed the street. "Mama," Sophia said suddenly, her voice thoughtful, "do you think he'll stay this time?" Clara's chest tightened, the weight of her daughter's question pressing heavily on her heart. "I don't know, sweetheart," she admitted. "But I think he really wants to try." Sophia nodded, her eyes downcast. "I hope so." That night, after the girls were asleep, Clara sat alone in the living room, staring out the window at the twinkling city lights. Eduardo had surprised her today. He had been patient, kind, and genuinely attentive to the girls. But could she trust that this wasn't just temporary? Could she risk letting him into their lives, only for him to leave again? Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Eduardo. "Thank you for letting me meet them. They're amazing. I hope I didn't mess it up." Clara stared at the message for a long moment before typing a reply. "They liked you. That's a good start." As she hit send, she felt a small flicker of hope. For the first time in years, the possibility of a new beginning didn't feel so far-fetched. But it would take more than one afternoon to rebuild the bridges Eduardo had burned. And Clara wasn't ready to let her guard down just yet. Rebuilding bridges. The days following Eduardo's first meeting with Emily and Sophia were a whirlwind of emotions for Clara. Emily, true to her nature, was already asking when Eduardo would visit again. Sophia, however, had been more reserved, spending hours quietly sketching in her room. Clara could sense her younger daughter's wheels turning as if she were trying to process the significance of Eduardo's sudden appearance in their lives. Clara had agreed to another meeting, but this time it would be more informal, a family day at the park. She wanted the girls to feel comfortable in an environment they loved and where Eduardo could begin to understand the rhythm of their lives. The park was bustling with life that Saturday afternoon. Children's laughter mingled with the rustling of leaves in the autumn breeze, and the scent of fresh pretzels wafted from a nearby vendor. Clara watched as Emily dashed ahead, her energy uncontainable, while Sophia walked beside her, holding tightly to her hand. Eduardo arrived moments later, carrying a small picnic basket and looking uncharacteristically casual in a plaid shirt and jeans. "Hey," he greeted, his voice warm yet tentative. "I hope I'm not late." Clara gave him a small nod. "Right on time." Emily wasted no time running up to him. "What's in the basket? Is it snacks?" "I hope it's snacks." Eduardo chuckled, kneeling to her level. "It's snacks," he confirmed, opening the lid to reveal an array of sandwiches, fruit, and cookies. "But only if you're willing to share." Emily beamed. "Deal." Sophia hung back, her eyes flicking between Eduardo and the basket. Eduardo noticed but didn't push. Instead, he turned to her with a soft smile. "I brought something for you, too," he said, pulling out a small set of watercolor paints and a pad of thick paper. "I thought you might like to try these." Sophia's eyes lit up, though she quickly looked down, shyly clutching the handle of her sketchpad. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. The four of them found a sunny spot on the grass to spread out the picnic. Eduardo carefully laid out the snacks, while Emily eagerly dove into the sandwiches. Clara watched him interact with the girls, noting his effort to balance Emily's boundless enthusiasm and Sophia's quieter nature. He was attentive, patient, and most importantly, genuine. After they ate, Eduardo joined Emily in a game of tag, while Clara sat with Sophia, who was quietly experimenting with the watercolors Eduardo had given her. Clara observed her daughter's small, careful strokes as the colors blended on the page. "What do you think of him?" Clara asked gently, her voice low enough not to carry. Sophia paused, her brush hovering over the paper. "He's nice," she said finally. "But what if he goes away again?" Clara's heart clenched at the question. She placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I do know he's trying. And no matter what happens, you and Emily will always have me." Sophia nodded, though her thoughtful expression lingered. Later that afternoon, Eduardo approached Clara as the girls played together on the swings. He stood beside her, his gaze fixed on Emily's infectious laughter and Sophia's quiet joy. "They're incredible," he said, his voice filled with awe. "I can't believe I've missed so much." Clara folded her arms, her tone measured. You missed it because you chose to. You can't expect to walk in now and have everything fall into place." Eduardo turned to her, his expression earnest. "I know, and I don't expect that. I know I have a lot to make up for, and I don't even know if I'll ever earn your trust again. But I want to try. For them." Clara studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of insincerity. She saw none. Instead, she saw a man who seemed genuinely remorseful, a man who was finally confronting the consequences of his past choices. "They're not just a part of my life, Eduardo," she said firmly. "They are my life. And if you want to be part of it, you have to prove to me, and to them, that you're here to stay." Eduardo nodded solemnly. "I will." Over the next several weeks, Eduardo became a regular presence in the girls' lives. He attended Emily's school art fair, where she proudly showed off her finger-painted masterpieces, and sat quietly at Sophia's violin recital, his eyes welling with emotion as she played a delicate melody. He joined them for board games on Saturday afternoons and helped Emily build a treehouse in the backyard, a project that ended with Emily covered in sawdust and laughing hysterically. Sophia, however, remained cautious. She watched Eduardo carefully, her small, thoughtful eyes taking in every interaction. It wasn't until one rainy evening, when Eduardo brought her a book on famous artists, that she began to open up. "Thank you," she said softly, flipping through the pages. "I like this one," she added, pointing to a painting of a serene landscape. Eduardo smiled, sitting beside her. "Do you know what's amazing about this painting? It's not just the colors. It's the way the artist makes you feel like you're standing right there." Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe I can paint like that one day." "I think you can," Eduardo said earnestly. "You're already so talented." For the first time, Sophia smiled at him, a small but significant moment that warmed Eduardo's heart. Clara observed these changes with a mix of relief and guarded hope. Eduardo's efforts were genuine, and the girls were responding to him in their own ways. But Clara's trust was harder to win. She had spent years building a life without him, and the scars of his abandonment still lingered. One evening, after the girls were asleep, Eduardo stayed behind to talk to Clara. They sat in the living room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting long shadows across the room. "Thank you," Eduardo said, his voice low, "for giving me a chance, for letting me be here." Clara sighed, her hands resting in her lap. "I'm not doing this for you, Eduardo. I'm doing it for them. They deserve to know their father, even if I'm not sure where you fit in." "I understand," Eduardo replied. "But I want you to know something. I'm not the same man who left 5 years ago. I've made mistakes, terrible ones, but I've learned from them. I want to be better. For them. And for you." Clara's eyes met his, her expression guarded. "It's going to take more than words, Eduardo. It's going to take time." "I'm willing to wait," he said softly, "as long as it takes." As the fire crackled softly in the background, Clara felt the first cracks in her armor. She wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet, but for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps healing was possible, not just for her daughters, but for herself as well. A new foundation. The following months became a delicate balancing act, one that tested the patience and resolve of everyone involved. Eduardo, determined to prove his commitment, continued to show up for Emily and Sophia, carefully integrating himself into their routines. Clara, though still guarded, began to see the steady transformation in him. The man who had once prioritized ambition above all else was now learning the value of time, presence, and love. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Eduardo proposed the idea of a day trip to a nearby nature reserve. He wanted to show the girls something different, something that would allow them to explore and bond as a family. Clara was hesitant at first. Long outings were a departure from their usual routine, and she worried about how Sophia, in particular, would handle the change. But Emily's excitement, coupled with Eduardo's quiet determination, convinced her to agree. The drive to the reserve was filled with Emily's chatter as she peppered Eduardo with questions about the animals they might see. Do you think we'll see deer? Or maybe bears? What about rabbits? Eduardo laughed, his voice warm. I'm pretty sure we'll see some deer. Maybe rabbits. But I don't think there are any bears. At least not the scary kind. Sophia, sitting quietly beside Clara, clutched her sketchpad. Can I draw the deer if we see them? She asked softly. Of course, Eduardo said, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. I'd love to see your drawing when you're done. Sophia's lips curved into a small smile, though she quickly turned her attention back to the passing trees. The nature reserve was breathtaking, a sprawling expanse of trails, towering trees, and a sparkling lake that reflected the blue sky above. Emily immediately took off running toward a cluster of colorful wildflowers, her laughter ringing through the air. Sophia stayed close to Clara, her gaze sweeping over the scenery with quiet wonder. Eduardo carried a backpack filled with snacks, water, and supplies, his demeanor relaxed yet attentive. Let's take the trail by the lake, he suggested, pointing to a map posted near the entrance. It's not too steep, and we'll get a great view of the water. Clara nodded, appreciating his thoughtfulness. Together, they set off, the crunch of leaves beneath their feet blending with the sounds of birdsong. As they walked, Eduardo made an effort to engage both girls in conversation. He asked Emily about her favorite books and Sophia about her art, careful to give each of them equal attention. Clara noticed how he adjusted his approach to suit their personalities, playful and animated with Emily, gentle and patient with Sophia. It was a far cry from the man she had known years ago, and it stirred something unfamiliar in her, a flicker of hope. Halfway through the trail, they stopped for a break by the lake. Eduardo unpacked sandwiches and juice boxes, while Emily explored the shoreline, searching for interesting rocks. Sophia settled on a nearby log, pulling out her sketchpad and colored pencils. Eduardo watched her for a moment before sitting down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. What are you working on? He asked. Sophia hesitated before tilting the sketchpad slightly to show him. She had begun a detailed drawing of the lake, the water shimmering with soft strokes of blue and green. That's beautiful, Eduardo said sincerely. You have an incredible eye for detail. Sophia's cheeks flushed slightly, but she smiled. Thank you. Encouraged, Eduardo continued. Do you think you'd ever want to take an art class? I know a place that teaches painting and drawing for kids your age. Sophia's eyes lit up, but she glanced at Clara, seeking her approval. Clara smiled, her voice gentle. If that's something you want to do, we can look into it. Sophia nodded, her excitement tempered by her natural reserve. I'd like that. Later, as they made their way back down the trail, Eduardo found himself walking beside Clara, while the girls walked ahead, collecting leaves and chatting about their favorite moments from the day. Thank you for letting me do this, Eduardo said quietly. I know it's not easy for you. Clara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. It's not about me, Eduardo. It's about them. I know, he said, his voice filled with conviction. But I also know I hurt you, and I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I want you to know that I'm here. For them, and for you, if you'll let me be. Clara's gaze softened, though her guard remained intact. You've made progress, she admitted. But trust isn't something that comes easily for me anymore. It's something you'll have to earn. Eduardo nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. That evening, back at the brownstone, the girls were buzzing with excitement, recounting every detail of their day to Rose, who listened with a warm smile. Emily showed off her collection of leaves, while Sophia proudly displayed her finished sketch. It sounds like you all had a wonderful time, Rose said, glancing at Clara. It's good to see them so happy. Clara nodded, her heart full as she watched her daughter's joy. For all her reservations, she couldn't deny the positive impact Eduardo was having on their lives. As the weeks turned into months, Eduardo's presence became a steady rhythm in their lives. He attended parent-teacher conferences, helped Emily with her homework, and supported Sophia's newfound interest in painting. The girls began to trust him, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Clara, too, found herself lowering her walls, albeit cautiously. Eduardo's actions spoke louder than his words, and though the scars of the past remained, she began to see the man he was becoming rather than the man he had been. One evening, as they sat together after putting the girls to bed, Eduardo turned to Clara, his expression serious. "I know I can't change the past," he said, "but I want to build something new, with them, and maybe, someday with you." Clara studied him, her heart torn between fear and hope. She had spent years protecting herself and her daughters, but now, for the first time, she saw the possibility of a future that included Eduardo, not as the man who had left, but as the man who had fought to come back. "It's going to take time," she said finally, "but I'm willing to try." Eduardo's face broke into a smile, his eyes filled with gratitude. "That's all I could ever ask for." As they sat together in the quiet warmth of the living room, the foundation of something new began to take shape, fragile but filled with the promise of healing, love, and a family finding its way back together. Finding home. The following weeks passed with a sense of cautious optimism. Eduardo became more deeply woven into the fabric of Clara, Emily, and Sophia's lives. His commitment never wavered. He was present at every recital, every school event, and every quiet evening at the brownstone. The girls grew to trust him in their own ways, Emily with her boundless affection, and Sophia with her thoughtful gestures, like showing him her newest sketches or asking him quiet questions about his favorite books. Clara watched it all with a mixture of relief and trepidation. She could see how much the girls adored Eduardo, how they lit up when he walked into the room. But she also felt the weight of their vulnerability. She couldn't afford for Eduardo to falter again, not when her daughters were finally opening their hearts to him. One crisp December evening, Eduardo invited them all to his penthouse for the first time. Clara was hesitant, worried the lavish setting might overwhelm the girls, but Emily and Sophia were thrilled at the idea of seeing where Papa lives. The penthouse was elegant but surprisingly warm, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city lights. Eduardo had taken great care to prepare for their visit, setting up a cozy area with board games and even decorating a small Christmas tree. "Wow!" Emily exclaimed, running to the tree. "It's so pretty." Sophia lingered by the window, her eyes wide, as she took in the glittering skyline. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Eduardo knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "Do you like it?" Sophia nodded, her gaze never leaving the view. "It's like a painting." Eduardo smiled. "Maybe you can draw it one day." Clara stood back, watching the scene unfold. She felt a pang of something unfamiliar, an odd blend of contentment and hope. Eduardo had worked hard to create a space where the girls could feel welcome, and for the first time, she began to believe in his sincerity. Later that evening, as the girls played a spirited game of Uno, Eduardo pulled Clara aside. They stood by the window, the city stretching out before them. "Thank you for bringing them here," Eduardo said, his voice low. "It means more than you know." Clara crossed her arms, her gaze focused on the girls. "They're happy. That's all that matters." Eduardo hesitated and said, "What about you? Are you happy?" Clara turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "I'm getting there," she admitted. "But I'm still scared, Eduardo. Scared that you'll leave again, or that this won't last." Eduardo reached for her hand, his touch light but steady. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "I know I've given you every reason to doubt me, but I promise you, I'm here. For good." Clara looked down at their hands, her walls beginning to crumble. "It's going to take more time," she said softly. "But I'm starting to believe you." Eduardo nodded, his expression filled with quiet determination. "Then I'll wait as long as it takes." The holiday season brought a sense of renewed joy to the brownstone. Eduardo joined them for Christmas morning, bringing thoughtful gifts for the girls and helping Clara and Rose prepare a festive dinner. Emily was ecstatic over her new art supplies, and Sofia spent hours poring over a book Eduardo had given her about famous women artists. As the day wound down, the girls curled up on the couch, exhausted but happy. Eduardo and Clara sat together by the fireplace, the glow of the flames casting a warm light over the room. "I never thought we'd get here," Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Eduardo turned to her, his expression soft. "Neither did I. But I'm grateful every day that we did." Clara took a deep breath, her heart finally beginning to let go of the pain she had carried for so long. "Maybe this could work," she said, her voice tinged with both hope and caution. Eduardo smiled, his eyes filled with gratitude. "It already is." As the year came to an end, the family began to settle into their new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of uncertainty, but they faced each challenge together. Clara and Eduardo worked hard to rebuild their trust, finding a balance between their shared past and the future they were creating. For Emily and Sofia, the change was nothing short of transformative. They had their mother's unwavering love, their father's steady presence, and the promise of a family that was finally whole. And for Clara and Eduardo, the journey wasn't just about reconciliation. It was about rediscovering the best parts of themselves and realizing that, sometimes, second chances were worth the risk. In the end, their story wasn't just one of heartbreak or redemption. It was a story of resilience, of love that endured despite the odds, and of a family finding its way home, together.